So maybe someday.
Well, I'm hoping.
Turn down a little bit.
Oh, of course.
It could be turned.
Sorry.
Um,
Just so it's not excuse
Yeah.
me, babies.
well, I'm hoping that it obviously won't be until late this year, but I'm hoping I can have some sort of showing of this film, and then I will definitely.
Wouldn't that be
we can,
fun?
We can
God.
get you to New York, and then you can also meet all these people.
Oh, that would I'd be the
That'd be fun,
biggest
right?
fan. Sign my shoulder,
I think that would be
my bare
awesome.
shoulder. Do you want Pippin out of there?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm good.
Keep
She
him out the
will.
window.
She will stay there. She's guarding the
Very quiet. This one is the one that's
guarding the world, and he'll settle down too. When we all stop, kind of, he will go lay down and find a place.
I'll get Peter.
He's really been a wonderful dog from day one. He's my hero. He really was my strength during the cancer.
Yeah, there's nothing like a.
You were my guardian angel, baby. Yes, you were.
Yeah, unconditional love is a nice thing.
There it is. There's the sentence.
Well, okay then. Now we're gonna start here.
Okay, hit me.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna literally start going through your list. If that's good.
It keeps it easier because it's a flow of
Yeah,
time
exactly.
time frame flow.
Yeah, exactly. That also probably.
Because if
naturally
I
leads
divert,
you- yeah. No, you're welcome.
if
to
I
divert as much as
digress,
you want.
we'll
I'll
be.
Just, I'll just butt in with questions if.
Okay, cool.
You know.
Whatever you need.
But let's start from the top here with yeah, I guess the beginning, mother's love. Here you wrote.
I don't know about anyone else, but I had the most magnificent mother that a guy could ever have. She was stone drunk, but she was the loveliest soul who got drunk, who was, sick with the disease. Now, I didn't experience it throughout my whole life, but it was later on, during after her third child, I believe, that the disease took hold, really took hold, and we started having a fully alcoholic home. And but in spite of that, she was sweet and kind, even during all of that stuff. And today, as I look back, and most of my perceptions today are after having, are in hindsight because of experiences. She is, when I met the God of my understanding and sobriety, that's who it was. The spirit of who she was as a person here was so encapsulated with my concept of a spiritual power, a higher power today. And it just clicked that I had that experience long before I needed it, in the sense of saving my life. I had it for nurturing, I had it for discipline, I had it for upbringing, and she was the one who would save me from my rageaholic dad's temper tantrums. Marvelous, marvelous lady. And I didn't know it all at that time. I didn't have all this information or material or awareness. But I was so blessed. And when it came time to come out, both parents were extraordinarily supportive to me. So when I think of mother's love and the God of my understanding today, those two unique factors are so embedded. It was so easy to recognize God that was like mom stepped in and became a higher power. But it's kind of the opposite. The higher power was with me the entire time, at least spiritually. Talk about unconditional love. Super, super lady. And I really miss her. I miss her more now at my age. She died a year younger than I am now. And it's I miss her as much as though it's real fresh. Her funeral's fresh. So that's kind of emotionally reassuring, but it's also a little taxing on my my heart and my emotional endurance.
Where did you grow up?
Detroit, Michigan.
What was it like there?
It was before. It was. You could still live downtown. Dad came home from the war. We were living down in an apartment downtown. He went to work for Blue Cross. He was one of the first employees with Blue Cross and Blue Shield Insurance. Detroit was the home office. To streetcars, movie theaters, afternoon matinees. You just jump on the streetcar and go to see Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello. Oh my God, am I dating myself? Um, and the school was real close. It was like only a block away, and we walked to school. It was kindergarten, I think, for me at that time. I think we were there. I was 4 and 5. And I remember a lot of it. I remember the other kids in the apartment building we lived in. But it wasn't at all like today, at all. They had construction of apartment buildings that were literally artworks with the kind of trim and balustrades and walkways and garden layouts. I remember that a lot. Much like you would see as a tourist in maybe bigger cities, Chicago, New York, that type of thing. Then we moved out of that. Once Dad got that good job, the World War II guys had housing benefits, VA housing benefits, and they were now starting to build the subdivisions out in outside the city. That became the downfall for the city. Actually, is all those suburbs.
You say your dad arrives home from the war.
Yeah, he and we didn't get along from day one. I was 5 years old. We climbed in the back seat. Mom introduced me to him, and he tried to pick me up, and I wouldn't let him. I remember this. And I thought, who is that? What's this? Who is he? She and I had been together for 2 years on our own, and there was nothing to be afraid of about her. But my dad's outer presence was that he was a sergeant in the Army, and he was a macho ex-football player from a coal mining family, and an abusive dad, drunk dad, and that plays into his youth, coming home from the horrors of war and having a family already, right away. And there was something in him, in his body language. I was afraid of him from day one. And we got in the car. He and I were in the back seat. I think it was a taxi, if I'm not mistaken. He went to reach for me, and I screamed really loud and jumped over into Mom's lap. I mean, there was no, nah, I don't wanna. It was a, fuck you, and jumped over into his lap. So he said that sort of described our relationship for quite a few months. And then he disciplined me. Somewhere along the line, I needed to be disciplined by him, and it was physical, and it was breakage of the toys I was actually using. I think I got told put the stuff away and come to dinner or something like that, and I kept playing, and he took everything and broke it right in front of me. And then of course I got the spanking of my life, and no dinner that night. I think I was more angry about the no dinner. And that didn't happen every day. That was just one of those experiences that kind of defines that part of his character. There were many sides to his character, and most were good. But that rageaholic played into my attitude towards the world, towards male love and support and trust issues. I'm not so sure it didn't set me up for the relief I had when I found I was gay. I'm not sure that's not true. So.
The Wizard of Oz. I'll get you, my pretty.
I had he took me to see a matinee of The Wizard of Oz. I was terrified of the witch throughout the entire film. Then I became her in several shows as the years went on when I started performing. And he, I had nightmares that night. And he came in and spanked me for having nightmares and crying at something so silly. And I will never forget that as long as I live. Now, I don't know what association I made from that day on about that type of thing, but Wicked's my favorite show this year.
And your first Halloween in drag? 4 years old?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. You remember that?
I have a photo. I'm not quite sure where it is. It's on my computer, I think. Yeah, I was. My brother was made into a Oriental boy, Asian boy, with the pigtail and the costume, and I was Aunt Jemima. I didn't ask to be Aunt Jemima, but I was Aunt Jemima, and there are lots of photos of that. We Halloweened within the apartment complex. We couldn't go out on the streets to other buildings. That was my first time in drag, lipstick and all.
Wow, 4 years old.
4 years old. Don't ask me what the reasoning was behind.
Behind what? Well, is that the reasoning? What you're also saying here, the Vatican effect, super Catholics?
No, when
I want to be a Dominican nun.
we were brought up to be in the Catholic faith, and I started Catholic elementary school in first grade, and that was my first introduction to the nuns, priests, the formality of uniforms and discipline and an education of that nature, and I took right to it. I institutionalized very well, apparently, and but I went beyond that. I had it was almost fantasy appreciation for that lifestyle, that structure that the nuns and the priests had. I remember absolutely loving the Dominican sisters' habits, outfits, and I actually made one and wore one around the house several during those early years. And then I became an altar boy, and then I partook in church liturgy as though I were an adult. It fascinated me. It was the best show in town. And I actually started becoming convinced that everything the church preached in its doctrines had a life of its own and was true. I couldn't make any connection to other than that. And that set me up for being a very serious Catholic. Serious as well as dedicated and comfortable right away. It's like some guys take to the army, basic training, and they take. For me, it was the Catholic faith and Pope and the Rome. I was going to be the first American Pope. That was my goal, and it started way back, when I was a youngster. And then I knew I wanted to be a priest, and they kept telling me I couldn't go yet. I was too young, and I had two favorite nuns that I became a sidekick to. They were just beautiful ladies, beautiful souls. Even to this day, one is still she's slowly dying in a nursing home, so she's in her 90s. She had the sweetest singing voice, and I was head of choir, a youth choir at that time, and I had a very good singing voice back then, and she would let me sing with her at daily mass when there was no choir. It was just the one nun playing the organ at high mass, and she would let me come in and sit with her and sing, and she was very fond of me and strong about helping me with my vocation, possible future vocation, and it was all very meaningful and I'm going to say enjoyable. It filled something in me.
And when did you decide then not to be a priest? Or...
Well, I went in to the seminary and in eighth grade, we were. They sent one of the African orders, missionary orders, sent a man around to entice us, a recruiter, and he took me and five other guys, and we went on a weekend look-see at this seminary, which was just in a few cities away. My mother was okay with it. My father was absolutely against it. I was too young, and he was truly correct. Um, After the weekend, I was gun ho, and I was going to be out of eighth grade very shortly, which would put me in freshman sophomore year at the seminary, and I loved it. Horrible first beginning. The what I ran into there was, um, and I didn't see it during the nice spring weekend they were showing us around. Uh, this seminary had fallen down in its discipline and principles, and they had some pretty shady characters coming in to be students, and we're talking guns and maybe a little drugs and maybe a knife or two here or there. And when it came time for my freshman um, uh, pledging, I guess you'd call it. It's called abuse today. They bullied. They gathered. The sophomores gathered up all of us freshmen, took us down to the bottom of the property. It was a very big place on a lots of acreage, with woods and so forth. And they did. I I couldn't believe I was in a seminary. And the last straw, they made us do all kinds of silly things, but the last straw was when they pulled a knife on a young man from Canada who was terrified, and he ran. And they lost him for 3 days. The police were looking for this poor kid. But this little Cuban boy had pulled a knife, and he was sort of a ringleader and a bully and a bossy person in his class. And he didn't have a brain in his head, but he thought he was the big shot. And there was nothing going on that pointed to me that this was about religion or being priests or emulating Christ or God knows what. And he told everybody to take all their clothes off and jump in this horrendous swamp. There had to be animals and things in there. It just health-wise, it was not us. I just I just confronted him. I just got angry as shit. And I was very tiny back then, very thin and tiny. And I just had this, I was overwhelmed by, you guys call yourselves seminarians, and off I went on this tangent that this isn't what Christ wants. I was speaking for Christ's sake, at that time, okay? Um, and I've never regretted that because it stopped the whole thing. I brought them all back to reality, and I have found that I've been given that gift several times in my life over all the years. I've been used in that way by God and the universe. I don't know why. It's just for someone who breaks all the rules as much as I do, I get used sometimes to bring everybody back on track, including myself. And that's what happened here. And then I had friends who were juniors there in the class. I told them when we got back. We had cow dung in our shorts and sawdust and tree branches, and it was just horrendous. And those sophomores were taken out back by the juniors, and I guess all kinds of mayhem broke loose. Unbeknownst to us, they sent us a military director from a seminary and he was to straighten us all out. Well, half the sophomore class was dismissed and sent home. And the seminary changed, and it became a real, live, spiritual adventure. And I fell in love with it. Just in love with it.
When did you this backyard talent show? When did that come out?
I was 10. And what I have done all my life theater-wise, I did that day. It began that day. The neighborhood kids, we all got together. I was director. Let's do a show, just like Spanky and our gang. Let's do a show. That was the answer to everything, especially during the summer. And we had some kids who could sing, some who could. I tap danced, of course. Uh, did a magician's act. We strung up a bedspread in the backyard where on the laundry. Remember when they used to clothespin the laundry out to dry? We charged 10 cents, and the neighbors brought their own chair, and we did this show. It was horrible, horrendous. We made glitter musical notes, and we had a name for the show, and we pinned them on the bedspread. So we had this very elegant Las Vegas set, and that started it all. My brother did an imitation of Marilyn Monroe. He should have been the drag queen. It was very well received and very well supported, and that started something.
So Boy Scouts, that PB got fat. My first sin. I was a little fascinated by that one.
What did it say? Boy Scout what?
It says Camp Agawam.
Camp Agawam, yeah.
Boy Scouts, that PB got fat. Long and
Oh,
straight.
yes.
My first sin.
I saw my first penis, hard on, and ejaculation. A guy jerked off. I had never seen that before, and he called us all into his tent. We were at a camp for Boy Scouts, so the reputation is true. And this older young man, he may have been 12, 13, I don't know. He was old enough to do that, and I don't think I was yet. And he demonstrated he masturbated. I was so shocked that all the components of your first time seeing something like that, the physicality, the muscles, pubic hair, the organs and all that stuff, and this magical thing jumping out, and then I don't know if I can say this out loud, but you're probably going to have to edit all this, shot this huge load across the tent. We all went, wow! Well, I didn't know that could even happen. That was my first time, seeing that. And I really liked all of it. I have to tell you, if you'd come into me and said, what did you think? I don't know if I would have answered it that way, but I remember something in me saying, yeah, this is right. This is really cool. And then he showed us all how to do that. And I was amazed.
And that was the beginning of you.
That was my first sexual inner life began at that moment in time. And I was not horrified. I didn't run to confession. I wasn't traumatized at all. As a matter of fact, I wanted to do more of that. But I didn't know that, and I didn't know how you incorporated that socially. How do you just go up to a group of guys and say, let's all carry on? No.
So how did you come about that? With you saying here, spiritual counseling, what's a blowjob, my first French kiss?
When I went to the seminary, I was sexually molested by my confessor. He was my first French kiss. I was 15, I think, 14 or 15.
Did you know it was wrong? Or?
I can't. Not at first. I was very, very confused because it went against everything about being Christ-like. But he had a story to tell, which most molesters do, to keep you comfortable and drawn in and not reasoning it out of your head or paying attention to your own fears and feelings of maybe this is, there's something not right here. All that went away with his explanations. But he was my confessor. He was the athletic director of the seminary. He started paying attention to me my very first year there. I was a figure skater, an ice figure skater, and I was figure skating on our ice pond while he was coaching the hockey team. and he saw me skating, and he said, "We need you on the team. Come on over and skate with us." And I said, "No thanks. I really love this." I said, "I really hate hockey." I said, "You can get hurt." And he ordered me as a higher up in administration that I was to obey to go play hockey. So I had to learn, and I was fast, but I was lousy. And uh, he that began this seeing me on separate occasions, separate from the rest of the seminarians. But finally started inviting me to his room um, for counseling. And then I at that time I was masturbating a lot, and I had so much guilt over that in the seminary. Uh, there were several of us would meet and kind of get that out of the way, and then we'd all be wouldn't talk to each other for months because it was a sin. And you go to confession. And I remember I went to confession to him once about that, and also that I had male oriented sexualizing fantasies. Uh, the locker room was already at that age. I was being turned on by the guys in the locker room, and he took advantage of that. He saw the beginnings of whatever. I think he was 27, and he was physically today. If I knew what I know now, about all of that, there'd have been a different outcome to that entire experience. But anyway, he asked me to do things sexually and physically that his reactions and needs to were met for not sadism, masochism. He needed to be beaten, scratched. What he made me do is tie him up first in his underwear only while he had a hard on, and I was to strip completely and finish tying him up, and then had these chores. He had common everyday equipment like a hairbrush and things that had sharp edges on them and whatever. And then one time he asked me to do it with my nails, scrape him, come down his chest like a kitty cat. And I remember it was that day that I stopped. I stopped going to see him. I told him, I can't do this. There's something wrong. Because I walked away with skin under my nails and blood. And again, I stepped up, brought us all back to the awareness of why we're here. And he kept telling me that's what Christ would do. Christ suffered for us. He needed to be punished for man's sins. I wish you could take me out in the backyard and beat me with a tree limb. I wish I had done that. And the convincing and the rationale. Unfortunately, it separated me from my other classmates, and they knew I was a special kid and getting special privileges and being treated differently. And I'd come into several classes, and they'd have written my name with some disparaging, remark. And here I am, only 15, 16 years of age, and just really lost. And I didn't know I couldn't go to anyone and tell them. This had to be a secret. This was horrendous. And it stayed that way even after I left the seminary. He tried every single time he saw me. And he became a close friend of my family's. He played hockey on my dad's office hockey team with my brothers. He was at our home for dinner. And this is when I left the seminary. And I'd be getting ready to go to work. I worked a night shift at a hospital. And he'd come up, he'd excuse himself from dinner. Can I go up and say goodnight to Mike? Before he goes to work, and he would ask me right away. It's like nothing had passed, and that I was still this 15-year-old. And I remember almost hitting him the last time based on saying no. And I didn't see him again until he became the headmaster at the seminary. At that time, he was just an English teacher. And I was already a drunk and full-blown gay. And I had gone there with really improper intentions, but nothing happened. And he asked me again. It was years apart, He asked me again as though nothing was wrong. Asked the blowjob for was a very kind, very priestly junior who was, first of all, very attractive. Secondly, nice kid to me. Just, and he was funny. And he kind of shadowed me as because I was an outcast at times there. No one knew why. And John asked, so one day I thought it was appropriate to just do something that would be intimate and appreciative, and also I was attracted to him. And I didn't know why, I didn't know how, I didn't know how it all worked. We weren't dating or any of that stuff in the seminary. And several of us would get together sometimes and just have a masturbation outlet, but nobody interacted or touched. There was no formal homosexuality activities. But I blurted this out in the hockey locker room, and he was just stunned, and he went pale as a ghost, and I knew I had done something wrong. I knew inappropriate, and he told me to go see my confessor. That I needed help. That was very inappropriate, and that scarred me for life for a long, long time. That inappropriateness. I didn't know what to do with everything that had been happening up to this point in time that was linked to sexuality. I absolutely didn't. And the other most important thing in my life, God or my religion. Those two areas just couldn't meet.
So is that when you went into this? You said the homo cure.
I got released from the seminary, dismissed from the seminary by the molester, going to the board of the entire scholastic committee with my poor grades, and I had poor grades because I was a crazy person, not knowing what in the heck I could do and who I was. They reached a decision, let me go home and get my grades up in a regular high school, and then I could come back if I wanted to. What really happened is the director of the seminary, the military director, stopped by Father Gaughan's room one day when I was there, and he had hidden me in a laundry bag. I was naked as a blue jay, and the director knocks on the door. Father tells him, "Hold on, I gotta," I don't know what he said. Puts me in his naval laundry bag in the closet, and then opens the door and lets the director in, and they're chit-chatting. I think he knew. I think the director already knew something was going on, but he had no proof. The more Father Gaughan felt endangered by being found out, the quicker the strategy to get rid of me. And I was told it was my fault. And all during that time, I did not know I had been molested. You know when I found out? 40 years later, when I got sober. All of a sudden, someone said, "Michael, you were molested by a priest." And I went, "No, I was..." Oh my. That's how it all unfolded. So I was damaged for a very, very long time.
What was the next experience with drag? Either before or during or after all this?
I turned 21, had my first drink, met some kids who did drag. 64, 65, I believe, 1965 in Detroit. I got put in drag. Loved it. It's that photo up at the top, the blue one with the one with the blue outfit, 1995, I think. I was home. First of all, I was home because I just turned 21 and found gay bars. Okay, I had promised God at the seminary when I left I would never drink, never whore around, never blah 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 blah. Made all these promises until I was 21. I was still sick, liturgically and Catholic-wise sick. misperceptions in my head, and I made that promise, and I kept it. But the first drink, the next day I was in a gay bar. I didn't find it. I was taken there as part of my 21st birthday celebration by friends who knew I was gay as a goose, and I didn't yet. And that's how it all began. And shortly thereafter, I met some wonderful friends who are still friends today. Excuse me. There's only one of us left, but the rest have passed on. We all became part of a wonderful theater group and social group, and dear friends. But I couldn't wait for the next Halloween. It was that mesmerizing, and it was soul complete. It absolutely affected my inner soul. So the fact that others were doing it and that I could, it was a year before I was on stage. I just entered bar competitions for holidays or Halloweens, and with my other friends. It was amazing and very innocent. And we didn't do drag painted to God. We didn't know anything about contouring or any of the wild stuff. It took us 30 minutes to get ready. We just thought our own natural faces would do it. And we just slip into some makeup, but we were picky about our clothes. And the whole theme of doing drag back then was being women, being beautiful women on stage and convincing an audience that you were.
But it was only still for entertainment purposes.
Yeah. I never did take it beyond entertainment, even today. It's only, and I know others have, that they progressed and went into different directions, but that never, it didn't interest me. I loved that I was a boy, loved that, who could do this and convince you theatrically. I didn't have any interest in getting hormones or changing sexuality or any of that. That wasn't where I was. I was theater oriented, I think, about it. That doesn't make me any less or better than anyone who did, but I was real clear about that. Loved the illusion.
And when was Cinnamon born? So to speak?
Sin had my first drag show was at a straight bar. It was a formal straight bar that had drag shows down in the wharf area of Detroit. Very seedy, horrendous place. I was oblivious to what was going on down there. But show-wise, they had an amateur night, and I tried out. My friends had been doing amateur night down there almost every time they had it. And I asked one night, how do I get an opportunity to do that? I want to do it. And I'd just broken up with my first lover, and that night I did drag, and I made a drag name out of his name to hurt him, to insult him, and he was he he got a little wild and hostile about all that going on because he did show up for the show. But shortly after that, I realized I couldn't do that anymore. That just wasn't fun or fair. And someone said to me, "What, you are so spicy when you're on stage." And I thought, and Cinnamon popped out, and then my friend said, "Oh yeah, Cinnamon, let's call you Cinnamon Ginger." And I said, "No." So I ended up becoming Cinnamon Saint Sage, which was even worse. And then I became Cinnamon Saint Suck for just a little time, Again, no clue. And then I became Cinnamon St. Michael's, and that's the one I wear today. Yeah, she's spicy.
And you were focused on pageants in the beginning?
Yeah, just and back then they didn't have them like they are today. They ended up being bar contests, you won the crown of the bar, but there was no place to take it. So for a year you were Miss Gigi's or something like that, and it usually was a Halloween based experience, social experience. It is nothing like it is today.
Tell us a little bit about what it was like to be a drag queen back then.
You it was I don't I don't think too many would disagree with me if you really think about it seriously about what was going on back then. Mafia run and owned homosexual bars, usually in off dark back alleys with back alley entrances. It was illegal, and if we were in drag, we had to have and got caught. You better be wearing male underwear. If you were wearing a gaff or G string or any female, you went to jail, and that was the main rule about the law. About we weren't supposed to do it at all, but if you could get away with it in court if you'd not been wearing female underwear. They were really ill back then. Anyway, if you, became an employee of one of the largest mafia clubs. Thank, and that got me a lot of privileges, a lot of exposure and safety because they hired motorcycle gangs to take care of us and protect us, and they'd be security out back. They'd check your IDs coming in. That was almost at every club I was ever a part of, my whole life, as a matter of fact. Even when things relaxed, I worked at a Greek mafia owned bar, a gay bar for both men and women. It was an old bowling alley, two bowling alleys in a big building, and the top floor was women, bottom floor was guys.
What about the outside world?
The drugs weren't prevalent. Well, they may have been, but I didn't see it. The you couldn't tell anyone you were doing drag. You'd lose your job. As a matter of fact, I lost a job because one of the employees, assistant to my boss, was in the audience of that very first show I did, and I lost my job the next day. And that was kind of not unusual for the kids, for the guys who did drag. You really had to keep it quiet. But the other thing was there were always one night I came out of drag. I was in drag to drive home. I never had any sense, and I forgot. I didn't ask anybody to escort me to my car. When I get outside, there's a guy laying on the ground with a bullet hole in him, and he's in pain and he's bleeding. And he says, "Can you help? Would you help me?" And I hoist him onto my shoulders. I had a gorgeous outfit on, okay, spikes like that, and threw him in my car, and I raced him over the emergency room. But I put him out on the front of the hospital, of the emergency room doors. I couldn't go in, especially in drag. And secondly, I couldn't have the police with blood. Oh, Pip. Pip, Pip.
Okay.
She will do that as long as they're out there.
What's up? There's some dogs.
Yeah.
Just a couple dogs.
If they're going to come back, and she's going to do that again.
Oh, it's alright.
If the police if I had gone to the police or there was blood on my costume, my drag, there could have been I'd have been a suspect instantly, just because I was in drag that night. And that's happened. It happened a couple of times. You really weren't safe if you left a bar alone. Many times I drove home just because it was easier to go home and take the makeup off and stuff. And one night I had a detective attack me he offered to escort me to my car, and this Detroit detective in plain clothes attacked me, tried to sexually molest me, take my skirt, tried to get my skirt up, pull my pantyhose down, and get at my privates, and then wanted me to. He had all kinds of very sick fantasies, and the only way I got away from him was I was in my car, and I had the steering wheel in my hands, and I took my high heels and I jammed them into his chest, and they would have punctured him if he hadn't been wearing a trench coat. And he was knocked over backward, and he pulled his gun. He started to pull his gun, and I floored it. So I'm driving with one leg hanging out the door. The door's open. My skirt's up to here. Pantyhose are just about down, and there's nothing else on. Okay, and all I can remember was how beautiful those shoes were. I didn't even relate to the danger of that the next time I did a show, or it. I was so clueless at times. That could have turned out really, really bad, especially because it involved the police. They could have made up anything. I'm surprised I never went to jail for any of that.
When was there a shift? Do you feel in I mean,
I know exactly when there was a shift. Bars started opening that weren't owned by the mafia, and they were starting to open outside the city in the suburbs. Shopping centers, old empty supermarkets would become mega disco palaces, mega entertainment complexes. When that happened, showbiz took on an entirely new atmosphere. Kids were showing up to do shows, to be part of entertainment with a whole brand new uh, way of expressing drag and talent. And our group held Detroit's drag scene for quite a few years. We were the show because we didn't just stay individual performers on stage at local bars, straight or gay. We formed a troupe. We formed a performing troupe called the Kelly Photo Players, and it was the most wonderful experience of my life. We had the head of our group was a formal dancer and trainer, professional dancer on Broadway, and he formed our dance group, and we would put together production shows, Las Vegas style production shows. We rehearsed them for 6 months every Sunday at one of the bars. And then one of the bars would be lucky enough to hire the whole show. And we had 25 males and females in the main chorus. And then each one of those drags were headliners. So we had notoriety, we had the best, and we just pulled in men to be our backups, and we got a lot of really nice looking men and who made that commitment to theater that maybe wouldn't have been interested in drag if it hadn't been presented that way, Las Vegas wise. Feathers, back braces, sequins, G-strings, aerial lifts, different periods of music, old from the oldies to current, whoever was a current performer at that time. Miss Ross was done to God throughout that time, and we had like real props, staircases that lit up, mirrors that it was, and we made our own costumes. We did everything ourselves. I styled wigs for almost the entire group at that time, which was a huge project. But anyway, I loved it. And we opened our first show at Detroit had a restaurant called the Rooster Tail. It was mafia owned. And outside the Rooster Tail, it was known for its every year annual hydroplane races, just like the Monte Carlo car racing thing. But it was these hydroplanes. Diana Ross did her first show with the Supremes at this nightclub a few weeks before we appeared at that nightclub. It was before they were huge, but they were starting, and we were all giddy as kindergartners down in the dressing room that Diana put her makeup and dress on. We were very excited about that. We would actually start camping with each other about being her. She must have sat right here. We were so sick.
Was the alcohol abuse going on then, or Was that an ongoing thing ever since the abuse?
Absolutely. Ever since I turned 21. You see, I fell in love with the effect, and I chased that effect for 27 years, and I didn't know I had the disease. I was already genetically predispositioned, but I didn't know I had the disease.
And what
So.
made it? What made it stop? Counseling or
A bottom. I finally hit a bottom where I was desperate and hopeless, ready to kill myself. Actually, I'd already been doing that. So on the slow installment plan, and an incident happened that all of a sudden I had again a moment of clarity was sent my way, and I knew the jig was up. I couldn't define the jig at that time. I could not have told you what that was, but I had a moment of clarity that said, "This is done. It's enough. You can't do this anymore." And then I said a simple prayer, "God help me." That's all I did. I have never had a drink since. And that's that's a very common experience for alcoholics who have the disease. And there are different levels of bottoms. Some people end up almost dying, with a major disease, or they have my experience, or they have some get it earlier. Some just have enough reach a bottom very early in their use. But it takes that, unfortunately. That's the only way an alcoholic will stop. And that you are admitting you're in trouble. If you don't admit that, you're dead in the water. You'll just keep drinking. So, and then there was a program, and there was now there were treatment centers. I got sober when the treatment centers were first started. I was very blessed, and I cooperated the day I walked in. I knew this is where I was supposed to be, and 30 days later they had me on the road to sort of like Marine basic camp. I had my basics, and I could move forward, and then I had to have help. I had to stay connected to help, and that's how the 12-step programs fit into to our lives today. It's no longer about the drink; it's about keeping the alcoholic personality down, because that'll kill even a non-drinking alcoholic. The same man will drink again, and I believed that. A lot of people don't get that for a long time, but I believed that, and I didn't want to be that guy again. So everything about recovery from that moment on has been about not being that guy, not, and it's a long, hard journey, but it's worth. The results are immense, and it's not for everybody. It's not about me preaching that it belongs in everyone's life and all that. It's just my experience and what I needed. Thank God it was there so far. If I don't do today what I did yesterday, I could take a drink tonight, and it could all go. It's been, I've been as sober as long as I was drunk, 27 years. So that's 54 years. Amazing. Dying for 27 of it, and free for 27 more, and with some hope. How cool is that? Oh, do you want me to finish about the difference between drag then and when it started
please.
shift?
I'm sorry if I broke you off.
No, it's okay. I wanted I think there's some really interesting points based on we raised the level of drag performing from no longer being the solo person trying to be a girl, okay? And what came out of that was we had Barbra Streisand's, Diana Ross's, who went on in between the Las Vegas production show, went on to careers as better and more drawn, more like magnets for fans who were celebrating the great artists, Carol Burnett and we had all these kids who were when Bette Midler came on the scene. We had 30 of them, and they were all magnificent in their own mad ways. And we started getting girls and talents who did not want to be part of a disciplined production show. It felt too limiting. Now we got hired to go on the road, which was marvelous experience. I miss that, but we couldn't get any bigger. No one would have hired a cast that was any bigger than we were. So a lot of kids didn't get to be in our shows, and there were some hard feelings. But all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, started coming talents. And the names were changing. We weren't just sweet Tony King or Trisha Trash showed up for the first time. She was the best Bette Midler I have ever seen. But she threw furniture and glasses and musical instruments and beat on people during her performance, And the drugs started happening. Trisha was a huge drug user. She died from that. But what a marvelous talent. Betty Clark. All these queens started. The guy who did Barbara Streisand lived as though she were Barbara Streisand outside of shows. These girls were committed, or should have been, and from that started people competing against one another to create an image, a crazy person, what gimmick could I use to become big? And then we started seeing the outrageous, wearing a chicken wire G-string or with lights, and the makeup getting wilder, and the hairdos, 300 pounds of hair on, and all of that wild eccentricity, which at the time I didn't care for. It seemed grotesque-ish or like it was making fun, but I had no idea it was becoming an era. And it still is. The kids are still doing it today, trying to find that gimmick, and they're not afraid. And it's now accepted and enjoyed, and they've become 20 times the talent that I was part of. I feel wonderful about what's happened. Now, I don't like the ones who hurt each other or hurt us, the public. I don't like any drag that does that. But I do love the artistry of the painting today. When you see the before and after, it's like, how did that happen? Please, teach me. How did that happen? There isn't enough duct tape to pull up all these chins and wrinkles, okay? Help! And the art form started letting in people who could really sing live, who could really dance. Some of the neatest dancers are drag queens with formal training and costume, and they could make their own costumes and look. The costume look changed, sexy. Anne Margaret, Rita Hayworth, Madonna, less is more, just and then the hip pads came in. That part always bothered me, that we didn't have the bodies of real women like Marilyn Monroe, except my friend Tony King did. He was shaped like that from birth, and we used to kid her about it. God had slipped her a few dirty curves. We always told her that. She'd slip into a outfit and a waist cincture, and she literally, all the gay women adored him. He didn't have any false pads on. It's just how God. I think he missed his second and third rib, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, he was hips all the way up to here. And now we were having hip pads, and then breastplates, and then the jewelry changed, and then the backpacks, dusters, ruffled coats. Wow, it was. And you only had to have 3 drag queens in a show to have a stunning night of talent and performance. And then I got to be a part of the pageant scene as a sober guy, a judge. I became a judge of I was associated with the Miss Gay America pageant and Miss Gay US of A pageants as a local judge. And then I earned enough credentials to become a national judge for 1 year at Miss America. And there were 92 contestants, 7 days, and I think that was the neatest week of my life. For an art form that I loved, and because I had no real understanding how gifted these young people were. First of all, I hated them at the same time, but you know what? I didn't fit in either. That my generation or level of understanding performing. First of all, I don't know how these kids afford drag at all. Those gowns alone, um, but the gifts, the talents, the production numbers, the when they're interviewed as people, you're hearing a real person, not some sissy who's going crazy, to get attention. They have real goals in education and speak well and can communicate and care about advancement of gay life. Not just drag, but gay life completely, all the aspects of that. And that wasn't happening during our era. We didn't have fundraisers and charity things. It was all about the self. See me, give me attention. Aren't I pretty? Shy. But today it incorporates far-reaching effects on the general public, on our gay public, on the youth, those who hope to come up. Kids are starting drag way, way earlier than when I did, than any of us, and are like really good. So, did I answer your question?
Oh yeah.
I think I digressed.
No, it's good. When did you, was that in Detroit with the group you were talking about? Is that when you guys first heard about what was it to say, people dying from the gay cancer?
Yeah, the Baz opened, and we unfortunately I became a huge client, and I know, at least I think I know today, that that's how I got HIV. But
What was that place?
the actual name of it,
Well, you said the badge?
Baths.
Oh, the baths. Sorry.
Yeah. See, Bette Midler had done work, came out at the Continental Baths in New York. The Baths system started in L.A. and New York, and Europe first, and then they were very lucrative, and bar owners were opening them up as well, and making them entertainment nights, not just a place for promiscuity, but that almost took over our bar attendants, the Baths, and I lost the question.
Heard about this
Oh,
gay cancer.
they had posters up. Posters started appearing in all of the baths. I have to tell you again, I was not aware. It didn't. Whatever I was hearing, I didn't apply it to me. I don't know if it was pure denial or if it was just, again, I was involved in stuff that I just had no awareness for yet. Later I did. But I'd see these signs about using condoms, and I thought, that's horrible. I wouldn't have sex with condom. Yuck, wrong. And with that attitude, I didn't investigate why there was a please use protection for a long time, for a while. It didn't stop me from my routine and behavior in a bath, and I was one of many who felt the very same way, because we didn't understand that we had an actual health, death and dying epidemic yet. And it took a while to spread across the country from San Francisco and New York, that there was any real truth to it, or that it would impact our lives. mostly that was the point. It's them over there who are experiencing it, not us. They must have done something wrong or careless. It isn't about us. But then it became the gay cancer, literally and politically and financially, in the government, in the in newspapers and communication forms, um, and the movies started coming out that were portraying the struggles about HIV and AIDS. Most it wasn't about HIV. All we heard about was AIDS, period, and death and dying. Um, and somewhere along the line, I had a realization we were in trouble. I sort of linked up in my head with the conspiracy theorists at that time. I remember that, but it didn't. It didn't last long. We had too many people who medically could tell us what was going on. And matter of fact, we had more information than most of the country did as individuals. And that when they called it a cancer, it softened it. It we already had experiences with cancers, all kinds and all types. It didn't make it all that special, other than it was affecting a segment of society, of that I belonged to, and I didn't understand any of that, but there was nothing in place to treat it. For a while, there was nothing there to even diagnose it until you actually were ill and practically dying. And then there wasn't a huge outcry, but then there was. And from that moment on, from the advocacy on, most of us are alive today because of of what happened, and of course, the first treatments, the first combo drugs. Up to that point in time, you couldn't have convinced me to get involved or use any of that or to stop the behavior. It just it mostly it couldn't happen to me, and I was already addicted. Every one of my sexual experiences were based on my consumption of alcohol, even in love affairs. That's how I met a guy, and I was only a bar drinker. And I never drank at home alone or the and that was my downfall because I was.
How did you finally get tested?
And during my discharge from the hospital, I was in a 30-day treatment program. Um, they do a medical workup on you, and here, baby, Shy, come on up here. Come on. You don't know what to do. I know. I'm sorry. I think they knew I had HIV at that time as I was being discharged, but they didn't want anything to trip up my recovery. It could very well happen. I find out I have HIV too, and I'm a drunk. I might as well die and go kill myself, and that I might not have been able to handle both. So they didn't tell me. 2 years later, I went and got tested. I had sort of an epiphany. Gee, when I got sober, I immediately started volunteering with the AIDS organizations here in Baltimore. And I started doing patient care. And then I started training other patient care people. And then I've won a couple of newspaper awards for volunteerism. I really got into it for 2 solid years. My care patients, 4 of them died during that 2 years and wiped me out emotionally. I had nothing more to give, so I had to stop for my own protection. And also I could have drank again. And I knew that was possible. So I had to pull away, but I was grateful I got to do it. Those 4 guys were just loves. I just loved them. And they were all younger than I. And it seemed so unfair that they had to go earlier, than someone like me who had done all the things that would have deserved that to kind of demise. You know, that's the way my thinking was at that time. It seemed very, very unfair. Uh, but anyway, 2 years later, I stopped the volunteer work. I start taking stock of my own life, and I think I better go check. I went and had the test done, and it came back positive, and I was crushed. Um, for about 3 weeks, I was in major depression, but I didn't drink that entire time. I cannot. I was really protected by my recovery. I had a huge bank account in recovery that kept me from handling that news with drinking. Thank God. But if you can get through that, you can you can get through any. There is nothing that makes that a drink makes better. That's what I had to live by, and then I immediately started. I put myself in the system. Social worker, a physician, started applying for benefits and things because I really was starting to get sick. That's why I went and got tested. I started having endurance, exhaustion level issues, and I started having muscle and nerve pain, flu-like symptoms without having the flu. I had some neuropathy right away. That was one of the early kind of triggers for me. And I thought, I don't. There's something wrong, and there was. I was in the beginning stages of at that time they called that part of it the HIV disease. I finally I didn't trust the system about going on. I didn't follow the recommendations for going on a protocol. They had drugs. They had AZT. I saw too many of the guys sick and die or be worse off than they were or getting symptoms earlier than they would have because they went on those drugs. They were horrendous in the beginning, very lethal. And so I decided I'll wait. And I waited about 5, 6 years before I went on a protocol. And I didn't go on protocol until I was absolutely positively actually on death's door. I was here, home here, in hospice care, ready to die. And that's when I started the combo drugs and it saved my life. That was a miracle how that all happened. But my symptoms started increasing enough that I had to stop work. I was living the whole life of someone who was newly diagnosed with symptoms but hadn't advanced to AIDS yet. I really didn't think I would. I had a huge denial factor there, and I started living, taking better care of me. Um, Changed some eating. I reading Louise Hay's books, going to conventions of people with HIV, and we'd spend the 3 days boosting each other up and having a good attitude and reciting meaningful poetry will keep you from getting AIDS. And today it seemed like a bunch of hoopla. Back then it was the best part about it was that we got to be with people like ourselves. But all of that really didn't work in the long run. And someone made a lot of money doing all that stuff. But I finally did get full-blown AIDS. I got cancer, the kind of cancer that's associated with AIDS. Excuse me. And you could have taken me out and hung me. That's how scared and shocked I was that I had this cancer. But the cancer didn't have any legs. It didn't have any feet, roots. It was a tumor the size of a tennis ball, just hanging off the wall of the anal canal. Before wasn't in the rectum yet. It was in the anal channel. So just inside the anal sphincter, on the wall was this. What are those? Sconces. There's this wall sconce of a tumor, and the thing that was saving my life is that I gotten it early. It was getting too big, but it hadn't rooted yet. If it had, I'd have been dead man. I would have died of colorectal cancer. And they decided to do a huge, aggressive treatment on it of radiation and chemo. It was over a period of 3 or 4 months. I was in and out of the hospitals. Most of the time, I had to stay in the hospital because they were so. It made me so ill. In the end, long run, they destroyed the tumor completely. But what they had done was reduced my immune system to 0. I had no T cells, no nothing. And the last day I was in the hospital, I had said to the doctor, if you leave me here one more day, I'm going to die here. I just knew it. That's how I couldn't move. I couldn't lift my hand off the bed. But the tumor was gone. We got the tumor. During that entire time, they didn't bring in an AIDS or HIV doctor of any kind. I had no HIV care. It was kill the tumor. And they could have killed me. So anyway, they sent me home to die. And I found that out later, thank God. That's what makes everything else a huge miracle. And I was put into hospice here. And I didn't know the nurse was a hospice nurse. I didn't know I was dying. I knew during that remark of getting out of there, I felt better when I got here. I had some hope. But I didn't know I was literally, really medically dying. And with no HIV care, of course that was the case. There was no way to boost my immune system and destroy the amount of HIV that had just flooded my whole body. And the day that the hospice nurse was here, the second day, I said to her, "Who are you?" And she explained that she was the hospice nurse. I said, I don't need you. What I need is," and visiting nurses took care of everything else, the IVs, the hydration, I got food, later I was exercised here, PT, OT, then I was walked. And so over a period of 5 months, I rehabbed here in the house, did exercises in the kitchen, holding on to the cabinets. I never built up endurance, but I built up strength, and I built up self-care. I was able to go to self-care status. But I had radiation sickness, and I still have it to this day. That's 9 years later. 14 years later. The symptoms are chronic. Can be disabling. The issue is you can't determine when they're going to strike or how long they're going to last, but you certainly know when they're here. And then there's long periods of reprieve. But during all that time, your life is in complete chaos as far as can you drive today? Can you go to get your groceries? Just the usual basic things. And of course, my attitude, I needed psych help. They brought psych people in here to walk me through it. I went through a huge mourning period of crying, and I didn't want to. The one thing I did avoid was the suicide part complex of just kill me, let me die. But I didn't have a football player. Let's reach the goal. Those are my dinners.